Alright guys, so I got some pretty big updates on the protests that we have been covering over the last couple of weeks that have been popping up on college campuses across the United States against the genocide in Gaza that our government is fully complicit in. So I got a bunch of different videos that I'm going to show you guys of the, police responding to these protests using flashbangs and tear gas and rubber bullets directly on the students. But first, before we get to some of that, I want to start with what is probably the most unhinged monologue that I have seen throughout the entirety of this coverage from the mainstream media. This is CNN's Dana Bash, who is going to compare these protesters to 1930s Germany, okay, to Nazis, right? So let's go ahead and see how she tries to spin this and sort of work our way through it.
Welcome to Inside Politics. I'm Dana Bash. We start with destruction, violence, and hate on college campuses across the country. This was the scene just a short while ago at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Police clashing with protesters. 12 people were arrested. Hours earlier, protests rocked the University of Arizona, where campus police used chemical irritant munitions to remove protesters. Around the same time at UCLA, pro-Israel and pro-Palestinian groups were attacking each other, hurling all kinds of objects, a wood pallet, fireworks, parking cones, even a scooter. And before that, the NYPD was able to clear Columbia University after protesters barricaded themselves inside a campus building.
Okay, I do want to take note, first off, that this building, Hamilton Hall, that was occupied by these student protesters on campus, this is a building that has been occupied before, okay? Doing sit-ins as a strategy of protest is a very consistent thing throughout American history. This exact building was occupied back in 1985 for, I believe, 3 weeks by students who were trying to protest against South African apartheid. And that protest ended up leading to actual changes at the university and divestment, which is exactly what these current students are protesting, in this case against Israel. The same building again was occupied back in the 1960s when there were student-led protests against the Vietnam War. So this is a very standard form of protest that, for some reason, over the last couple of weeks, everybody has been pretending is like a military occupation, that this is not something that usually happens, and these must be like outside agitators. We'll circle back around to that narrative here in a bit. But I also want to point out, when she mentioned what happened on UCLA's campus, notice how she phrased it as there were pro-Palestine students and pro-Israel students who clashed. That's not what happened. And the things that she was listing out there, right? The fireworks and the wood pallets being thrown, these are things that were being shot at inside the encampment by the pro-Israel side. Okay, you had the encampment, and then the pro-Israel people showed up, and they started getting into fights with the pro-Palestine people. This was not a clash. This was Zionists, or in other words, outside agitators, who showed up specifically to try to fight the people who were inside the encampment. Okay, the encampments themselves across the country have been overwhelmingly peaceful until Zionist agitators show up, or until the police show up. And that's what happened in that circumstance. But of course, they used neutral language. Oh, it was a violent clash. No, it was an assault. Okay, but she continues.
300 people were arrested at Columbia and City College of New York. But it is unclear how many were actually students. New York City Mayor Eric Adams warned this morning that professional outside agitators are getting involved.
There is a movement to radicalize young people, and I'm not going to wait until it's done and all of a sudden acknowledge the existence of it. This is a global problem that young people are being influenced by those who are professionals at radicalizing our children. And I'm not going to allow that to happen as the mayor of the city of New York.
Okay, so to answer her question, we actually found out how many people who were arrested at the Columbia Hall, Hamilton Hall occupation. It was basically entirely students, not outside agitators. Okay, later on we had Eric Adams, who claimed that like 2 people who were arrested were not students, but then he couldn't substantiate that with any evidence. One of the people who he cited as being an outside agitator, it was disproven that they were even at the protest in the first place. So they completely made up that entire narrative. Okay, 99.9% of the students, the people who were arrested at that mass roundup at Columbia University, were students. Okay, so the outside agitator narrative is complete bullshit, but I'll show you guys what actual outside agitators look like here in a minute, because that's been something we've been seeing over and over and over again. But they continue.
These protests started peacefully with legitimate questions about the war, but in many cases they lost the plot. They're calling for a ceasefire. Well, there was a ceasefire on October 6th, the day before Hamas terrorists brutally murdered more than 1,000 people inside Israel and took hundreds more as hostages. This hour, I'll speak to an American-Israeli family whose son is still held captive by Hamas since that horrifying day that brought us to this moment. You don't hear the pro-Palestinian protesters talking about that. We will. Now,
notice how she tries to position herself here as like a brave outsider, I guess, right? Breaking through these student-led establishment figures, right, who are dominating the conversation. She's having the brave outside conversation, like the hostages should be returned. That's the conversation that is so brave for you to be having on CNN. You know who's blocking a hostage deal right now? Benjamin Netanyahu, Israel, right? Hamas accepted. They've, for months now, wanted to accept a deal that leads to a permanent end to the war and Israel withdrawing from Gaza, and in exchange, they return all of the hostages. It's been Benjamin Netanyahu that has been consistently blocking that deal. So if you want the hostages to be returned, you should be applying pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu, similar to how there are hundreds, if not thousands, of Israelis who are in the streets right now protesting Netanyahu for blocking that deal. I wonder if she'll have somebody on the show to talk about that, right? Because that's the reality of what's been going on. But the other thing that she hints at here, right, before she gets to this interview, I guess, that she's doing, is this idea that the protesters aren't protesting against Hamas, I guess, or that they're not bringing up the fact that there was a ceasefire on October 6th. First off, and this is something John Fetterman talks about all the time, why are people going out and protesting Hamas? My government, okay, the U.S. government, is not giving weapons to Hamas. We're not giving funding to Hamas. Okay, Hamas doesn't give a single solitary shit what American pro-Israel protesters have to say in this equation. There's no leverage to be used there. Okay, we're already giving billions of dollars in weapons and ammunition to Israel to obliterate Gaza. There's no more support that we could possibly advocate for in terms of the pro-Israel side of this equation. But on the there was a ceasefire on October 6th point, that's just a complete lie. Okay, it's a very easy lie. It's something that's catchy, right? And it sticks in your head. Well, Hamas violated the ceasefire, so everything that's happened since, they were asking for it. There was no ceasefire on October 6th. Let's be very clear about that. In fact, Israel was bombing Gaza just weeks before October 7th happened. 2023, before October 7th, was already one of the deadliest years on record for Palestinians in the West Bank. You have an ongoing continuation of the expansion of illegal Israeli settlements into the West Bank. Palestinians facing pogroms, Palestinians facing daily violence. Not to mention the 17-year-long occupation of Gaza, the blockade of the Gaza Strip. It's just such a lazy point to try to argue that history began on October 7th, right? And apparently a ceasefire on October 6th includes that structural violence from the state of Israel against Palestinians. That violence somehow doesn't register. It doesn't count in their minds. But she continues.
We will. Now, protesting the way the Israeli government, the Israeli prime minister is prosecuting the retaliatory war against Hamas is one thing. Making Jewish students feel unsafe at their own schools is unacceptable, and it is happening way too much right now.
I'm a UCLA student. I deserve to go here. We pay tuition. This is our school, and they're not letting me walk in. My class is over there. I want to use that entrance. Well, I can't take it. Will you let me go in? This could be over in a second. Just let me and my friends go in.
Again, what you just saw is 2024 in Los Angeles, harkening back to the 1930s in Europe. And I do not say that lightly. The fear among Jews in this country is palpable right now.
Okay, so that's enough of that. Notice how, in that part of her monologue, she doesn't mention anywhere in the entirety of it that Jewish students are leading many of these protests, right? It kind of conflicts with the narrative of like, this is not a protest against a genocide. It's not a protest against Israel's tactics in Gaza. It's actually secretly a protest where all of these students woke up one day and they all want to kill all the Jews, right? Or it's predominantly an anti-Semitically motivated protest. She doesn't mention the fact that Jewish students, Jewish organizations are leading many of these protests, right? And that guy, I mean, I covered this video, this guy that she just played here in a separate video. We've seen this over and over again. You will have Jewish students who are ceasefire advocates or whatever the case may be, who are inside the encampment. In some cases, they're leading Jewish prayers. In some cases, they're having Jewish like Seder meals, for example, right? With a whole diverse coalition of other students alongside of them. These guys, in some of these videos, they are not just Jewish students. They're not being blocked because they're Jewish. They're being blocked because they are pro-Israel, Zionist, outside agitators who are trying to go in there to stir shit up in the encampments. That's the reason for it. Right now, it's not good optics to block somebody from going on a certain path to their class or whatever, but he could go around. Let's be real about this. His goal here, as he has somebody filming him and is making appeals to the camera in the middle of this conversation, his goal here is to get this kind of a moment, okay? His goal here is not to prove a point about anti-Semitism, right? But we continue here because I got some more to get into. First off, as a reminder, this Dana Bash here, who just went on that entire screed smearing these protesters, this is the same Dana Bash who had this famous moment with Pramila Jayapal here, just from, I believe, a couple months ago. So let's go ahead and listen to this quick moment, just to get a gauge of where Dana Bash's coverage is at.
15,000 Palestinians have been killed in Israeli airstrikes, 3/4 of whom are women and children.
And it's horrible, but you don't see Israeli soldiers raping
well, Dana, I think
Palestinian women.
we're not...
She actually just said that, guys. So Pramila Jayapal brings up that there have been thousands and thousands, at this point when they were having this conversation, it was at like 15,000 Palestinians who have been killed by Israel. And she mentions 2/3 of them have been women and children. 2/3. It's actually closer to like 70%, so it's over 2/3. 2/3 have been women and children. You hear that fact of the mass slaughter of thousands of women and children, and your response is to say, but they don't rape them? That's your response. Which, first off, is not true. We've seen many, countless dozens of credible reports of the IDF engaging in widespread rape and sexual abuse of detainees. So it's not true factually, but it's also like, what is the point that you're trying to make there? That it's okay because they're not raping them, they're just obliterating them, blowing them up into 1,000 pieces with a bomb from the sky? That makes it okay because they didn't rape them beforehand? What kind of a sick, twisted, psychopathic brain comes up with that as a response to that question? Not to mention the fact, as I pointed out in many different videos before, that, I'm sure that there was some sexual assault that occurred on October 7th. That's not uncommon in those kinds of attacks. So I'm sure that did happen to some degree. But the reporting on mass, coordinated, systemic rape as a tactic of war has not been substantiated by any evidence whatsoever. And that's been one of the most cited things, the most cited allegations. Hamas puts babies in ovens, they behead babies, and they conducted a mass campaign of rape against women. Those are like the three main claims that are used to try to say, look at how barbaric they are. We have the moral superiority, we have the moral high ground, and so because they're so barbaric, whatever we're doing in Gaza is justified, because it's not as barbaric as putting babies in ovens or beheading babies, right? That's the line of logic that they used. And again, all of those stories were made up. They were fabricated. There were no babies in ovens. There were no beheaded, 40 beheaded babies or whatever. It was a false narrative that was spun to justify the war in Gaza. And that's her go-to response. At least they're not raping them. What a sick fuck. Now, we move on to show you some of the images, again, of what it actually looked like on these campuses. So I'm going to play this. This was a video of some of the flashbangs that were going on when the police showed up to this UCLA encampment here. So, as they point out here, it's literally every couple of seconds. They're shooting flashbangs at anti-war student protesters who were overwhelmingly peaceful before the police showed up. They're treating this as if it's a war zone, guys. You don't believe me? Watch this video and tell me that these police are acting in a proportionate manner by any stretch of the imagination.
There's a struggle going on over here now, but again,
Wow.
Oh my goodness.
Gina,
this is so dangerous. Again, they're shooting rubber bullets, but I can tell you from doing stories about rubber bullets, they are extremely painful. If they hit your leg, your arm, they could break your arm. But they're trying to get into this encampment to get everyone.
Guys, this is an image from a U.S. college, okay? Police at point-blank range teeing off on student anti-genocide, anti-war protesters with rubber bullets. This is where we're at, guys. All on behalf of a foreign government in the midst of committing a genocide with our complicity. This is the response from the government. This is the response from the establishment of these universities. It really is. It's hard to wrap your mind around actually seeing it. Now, another thing that I wanted to point out here is one of the common refrains, one of the common responses that you'll get from people is, well, these students were breaking the rules. They were breaking the university's guidelines, right? In some cases, they committed property destruction. They were violating the law. They were trespassing. They were this and that. And so, of course, the police had no choice but to respond in the way they did. The universities, they had no choice, right? Well, here you have an example, right? UVA, University of Virginia, appears to have unilaterally changed its policy on tents this morning to help justify calling upon the police to arrest protesters. 9:54, this change was made. I mean, so this is not the first thing that I've seen like this at some of these universities, but I wanted to mention this because I wouldn't buy into the logic of like, they violated a university code of conduct and so therefore it's justified to fucking do this to them, right? I wouldn't buy into that even if it, they are breaking university codes of conduct. But I just wanted to point this out. Like, this is not, a lot of these policies that they're supposedly violating were created. They were artificially ginned up when these universities found out about these protests just in order to try to make them illegal or in order to try to make them in violation of the university's codes of conduct. Now, we also had this, and I thought this was entertaining. Now, at GW, staff, the university had the staff, I mean, this is just so ridiculous and malicious at the same time. They had their staff hang a giant American flag from this listener hall overlooking the encampment. I mean, how fucking petty is this? You're gonna hang a giant American flag right in front of the encampment? I mean, it is what it is, right? It's completely ridiculous. You see through the bullshit tactics there. The students responded in what I think is the perfect way. They got a projector, it looks like, and flashed this up on it at night with Genocide Joe lighting up the American flag. Textbook. Perfect there. Now, we also have some pretty alarming statements from some U.S. politicians. I've seen this from members of Congress. We'll get to one of those here in a minute. This is from a New York City councilwoman. Okay, this is a person with actual authority and power in the city of New York. And she actually said, "Our schools are producing monsters, and it's now our job to slay them." This is an elected member of the New York City Council saying we need to slay our monstrous students. This is where we're at, guys. Now, one of the most ridiculous things that I've seen is how the NYPD has been treating all of this, right? We know the NYPD's tactics, usually. We understand what the NYPD is and who they're really there to protect and serve. But, I mean, it almost reminds me of how we see Israeli government spokespeople respond in these kinds of situations and just, like, fabricate things in real time, which I guess makes a lot of sense because the NYPD, like many police organizations in the United States, train with the IDF. So I wonder if they got these kind of tactics from them directly. But he actually went on Newsmax. This is the deputy commissioner in New York. He actually went on Newsmax and said that they found a book on terrorism at Columbia. They found a book on terrorism, guys. Now, the obvious implication of what he's trying to do here, which is alarming because this is the largest police force in the entire United States. They have a larger budget than most countries' militaries do. Okay, the NYPD. And this is a figurehead of that massive police force, this highly militarized police force, who is trying to smear these anti-war student protesters as being terrorists. That's the very clear implication of what he's trying to say here. Now, there's only one problem, which is, as pointed out by the poster of this is a book on history, the history of terrorism. It's written by some British historian. It's not a how-to book on here's how you do terrorism on a college campus. But this is what we're doing, apparently. Using history books that were found in a university, a common place you may find textbooks, right? And we're using this to now try to claim that the students are not peaceful anti-war protesters. They're actually literal terrorists. That's the claim there. Now, keep in mind the videos we saw of how they busted up the UCLA encampment, those police shooting the rubber bullets and tear gas and flashbangs. This was the response from the LAPD police chief. He says, "I'm thankful there were no serious injuries to officers or protesters." That's weird because, what's this? What's going on with this here? I mean, we had reporting here from the LA Times. I mean, just the police getting completely caught in an abject lie here. Police report no serious injuries, but scenes from inside UCLA encampment, protesters tell a different story. So just some details on some of the injuries. In a Thursday statement, the UCLA Palestine Solidarity Encampment decried law enforcement's actions, saying, "They tore students from our human chain and shot rubber bullets at close range. Many were rushed to the ER after the bullets connected with the heads and hands." The UCLA branch of Students for Justice in Palestine posted on X on Thursday morning that there were at least 5 people shot in the head with rubber bullets. Shot in the head with rubber bullets. Probably one of the people like that guy that we just saw there in that image. I mean, just lying, just straight up lying again. Nobody was injured, except for all of the people who we targeted at point blank range and shot in the head with rubber bullets. Yeah, nobody else was injured, I guess, right? Now, again, circling back to the outside agitator narrative, this was also exposed from a lie from the New York City Mayor Eric Adams. Retired elementary school teacher Nala Al-Arian lost more than 200 relatives in Israel's attacks on Gaza. Then, Mayor Eric Adams said she was the reason the NYPD raided Columbia University. So this is what we're talking about. Outside agitators, like grandmothers who have lost hundreds of family members in Gaza, right? This is an outside professional agitator, in the words of Eric Adams. This somehow justified sending 1,000 cops to Columbia University to mass arrest and to raid students. Now, I think I found some examples here for you guys of what actual outside agitators look like. So here's just one example, and this was posted by the guy who did it himself, like he was bragging about this, right? So Aaron Cohen, right, he says here, ran a quiet infiltration operation into the UCLA encampment and now down here with the LASD, by the way, Google LASD gangs if you have the time, who's staging now and preparing to make entry onto to begin taking down the pro-terror anti-Semitic encampment. Also had a good chat and a deep dive with Dr. Phil, who came down for a debrief. So this is a guy with connections to the IDF, okay? Israeli Special Operations veteran, law enforcement trainer, law enforcement and counterterrorism analyst. This is an Israeli Special Operations vet who is directly coordinating and working with the LAPD to go and not only smear these protesters as being terrorists, but to engage in violence against them, to mass arrest them. This is an outside agitator, right? But he's not going to be viewed by the mainstream media as that, of course. Now we also have this. The pro-Israel counter-protesters at UCLA were organized. Remember these pro-Israel counter-protesters, the ones who were launching fireworks into the encampment? They were organized by a group funded by billionaire Bill Ackman and friends, including Jessica Seinfeld. Okay, Jerry Seinfeld has been a completely deranged Zionist for a long time now, but especially over the last couple of months. But this is what outside agitation looks like. Is this not a professional, organized outside agitation group that's literally funded by billionaires to pay people to go and set up, these fancy jumbotrons and screens and amplification systems and whatever the case may be to get people to go and show up to these protests? This is outside agitation. Now, we also have, obviously, the famous underlying point here, which is very common with police forces in major cities across the U.S. Fewer than half of all NYPD officers actually live in New York City, and only 25% of LAPD officers live in L.A. I think I found some more outside agitators for you guys, right? So we have, just to recap, we have Israeli Special Operations veterans. We have literal billionaire-funded, celebrity-funded, counter-protests going on. And then we have, of course, the police as well. Now, a couple more things and I'll finish off this video. We had this absolutely insane moment where I think this was at Ole Miss in Mississippi, obviously. You had some small encampment, I guess. I don't even know if I would call this one an encampment, but you had a small protest, right, for a ceasefire against the genocide, etc. Very few people, from what I saw, actually showed up to that protest. Not too surprising, given that it's Ole Miss University, right? I'm somebody who grew up in the South. I know a lot of people who went to Ole Miss and Alabama. You get a feel for the kind of frat bro energy that goes to a lot of those schools. Ole Miss is one of those. And so in response to the pro-Palestine protesters on campus, you had this insane group of frat boys who showed up. They start harassing this black woman here. One of them, as you can see, I believe it's here, this kid, starts making monkey noises at her. He's jumping around like a monkey and making monkey noises at her, right? Ole Miss not sending their best. Now, we had all of this take place, and of course, in response to this, Governor Tate Reeves said it warms his heart. This objective racism on display from these frat boys here, that's what warms the governor's heart, right? Not peaceful anti-war protesters. That doesn't warm his heart. That makes him stay up at night, right? He can't sleep with that happening. But if you got a big group of frat boys who go out to scream at these protesters, flip them off, and do racist monkey noises at them, then somehow that warms your heart, right? Now, the other point about these frat boys that I want to make, because I don't think it's even worth substantively responding to them, they don't have any substance behind why they showed up to counter that protest, right? And if you don't believe me, we actually got some interviews with some of them. Now, this is going to blow your mind, guys. As pointed out here by Prem, Side by Side is going crazy. Okay, so this was an interview with one of those guys who showed up to that protest, just to give you a perspective in terms of how they feel about Israel and Palestine and what are their motivations for showing up. He said, we were going to go to the pool, but then we heard that this was going to happen, so we were like, fuck that, we're going to come over and counter-protest it. This is a 21-year-old business major, Trevor Leahy. He said he came out with his fraternity brothers, though he wouldn't say which one. Though the pro-Palestine students have a right to free speech, he added, he thought they were taking it too far. He said, I don't care that much. I just don't want them to encamp on my school. It looks ugly. Okay, so that's what we have. We have a bunch of frat boys who were like gonna go to the pool. They heard that there was a left-wing protest going on, and they were like, fuck that woke shit, we're just gonna go and counter-protest them. Why? Is it because you even support Israel? Is it because you know what's happening in Gaza and you're in favor of it? No, there's no substance behind it. It's literally just, I hate them, this looks ugly on my campus, so I'm gonna go and yell at them, right? Now on the flip side of that, on the pro-Palestine side of that, we have this, near tears, a student named Jana, whose family is from Palestine. She thanked the group after they got yelled at by those frat boys. This is what she said. Hey guys, I know that what just happened was really intimidating and it was a little scary, but I just want to say I'm so proud of you guys. This wasn't going to happen in Oxford without all of you guys. Palestine was being heard, and I just want to thank you guys so much. I know that was a big risk, but this is the most that people have ever thought for us. So don't give up. I know that was really hard, but we need to keep fighting. This was just the start of it. So you have frat boys who are showing up on their way to the pool who openly say, I don't really care that much, I just think the encampment looks ugly. And then on the other side, you have actual Palestinians who have family members. And they're coming out here and having to give this speech to the people who showed up to this protest, saying, thank you guys for dealing with that. I know that was difficult, right? But this is the most that Palestinians have been heard in this country. I mean, Jesus Christ, man, the difference there is just so stark. Now, we'll finish off with this. Of course, we have the government stepping in to try to ban free speech in this country when it comes to criticizing Israel. We covered that bill just a couple of days ago. Here we also have an escalation of that with the Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, calling for the FBI to investigate these students. What's his justification? Well, apparently they have similar tent colors. That's his justification for getting the FBI involved. And of course, Congress is listening. Congress is now instructing the FBI to investigate student protesters chanting "Death to America." There's just one problem. They never said that. Never said that. And even if they did say that, that would not be a justification to do an entire FBI investigation into them as if they're, planning a mass terrorist attack on U.S. soil? Ridiculous. Now, at the same time, we still have Israeli government spokespeople who are continuing to smear these protesters, right? The audacity of these motherfuckers. This is their ambassador to the UN, saying a familiar line here. We always knew that Hamas hides in schools. We just didn't realize that it's not only schools in Gaza, it's also Harvard, Columbia, and many elite universities. So again, the audacity of these guys after we've given them everything that they want to commit their genocide, and they've obliterated the entire education system in Gaza. Now apparently that's not enough. They want to go and crack down on these anti-war student protesters. I guess maybe in this guy's heart, he would really want for the IDF to come in with their Air Force and drone strike Harvard and Columbia. Maybe seems like that's kind of what he's floating. And I'll finish off with this, and I'm really finishing off here. This was pointed out by Ken Klippenstein from the Washington Post, right? Where they float an idea of instead of going out to protest, to try to apply pressure on your university, to divest from apartheid, to divest from genocide, instead of trying to go out and protest in favor of a ceasefire, what these protesters should actually do, according to the Washington Post here, and I'm not kidding, this is real, guys, they suggest that they should become investors in the U.S. defense contractors or other companies they want to influence. That would allow them to become activist investors and push for the changes they want to see from the inside. This is what the mainstream media thinks of us, guys. No, you shouldn't be protesting that your university has ties to Lockheed Martin and Lockheed Martin is helping to supply the weapons that are obliterating Palestinian children, don't apply pressure on these institutions, on these corporations. Join the corporations. Give the corporations your money. And then maybe somehow, I don't know, you're going to trick them into not being manufacturers of mass, of weapons that kill mass amounts of people. How is that process going to play out? I mean, it's unreal, guys. But, we'll finish off with that. I guess that's what these protesters should be doing, right? Abandon the encampments, go home, set up a stock portfolio, get some major investments somehow with all of your debt, get some major investments in Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman and the rest of them, and that's how we'll achieve peace at the end of the day. So, I mean, there you have it, guys. I mean, it's just full-blown crackdown mode, full-blown draconian police state mode, full-blown censorship mode, and we have a media here that is, dutifully being good little lapdogs for the U.S. government, for the Israeli government. I mean, just some of the most deranged smears that I've seen in my entire life. That the dishonesty about what is actually going on right now is it's unfathomable. And at the end of the day, all of this is just a distraction from what's going on in Gaza. The students themselves, if you listen to them and why they decided to go out there, all of their attention is on Gaza, right? But the media and our politicians would much rather talk about a broken window on a Columbia University campus than they would about the entire destruction of every major university in Gaza. That's what they'd rather talk about, because it's an easier conversation to have, right, than having a conversation about our complicity in genocide. And unfortunately, we just have to keep trying to force that real conversation, into the mainstream.
Politic guy has the best politics. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying